Hey everyone! Recent comments on some of my videos have encouraged me to reevaluate my site and its content. What I've realized is that there's a definite stigma attached to parental reviews, and that the majority of gamers are definitely going to initially react negatively to the work that I do. Their reaction is completely justified because, more often than not, the writers of game content reviews, similar to what I do, are not passionate gamers. I had hoped that my level of detail in my written and video reviews would show that I do love these games, but I've come to the unfortunate conclusion that citing specific examples and using visual evidence as backing for my recommendations isn't enough. I want to make clear that I don't believe that anyone who takes the time to sit down and read my reviews or watch my videos is going to commit heinous acts of violence. I know that what little correlation there is between violent games and violent behavior does not equal causation. I know that playing violent games does not make you a killer, just as you don't have to be a killer to play violent games. Unfortunately, the issue is always more complicated than it seems on the surface. Every gamer of every age, race, gender, and nationality must understand that there is more at stake here than being able to play any one game. There are a lot of adults that are scared, concerned, or stressed out because of disturbing television reports they see on the news. Major news outlets are reporting increased bullying, suicide, and violence amongst preteens and teens. Everyone is looking for the reasoning behind it all. Parents want to figure out what is wrong so they can fix it and protect their kids. It's completely rational. They love their children and want to keep them safe, so they're looking for anyone to make that possible. The media is all too happy to supply them with a scapegoat. Historically, new forms of entertainment have traditionally been blamed for violence. When movies first became popular, they were lauded as the downfall of society, so it makes sense that video games are now being targeted the same way. But video games are much more complicated than passive media such as movies or radio because of the inclusion of interactivity. It's not some random character that's committing these acts of violence, it's you. You decide who lives and who dies. You're the one that pulls the trigger. And as games become more immersive and more realistic, this debate becomes more heated. Why do you think parents in the media get pissed at some games and some content but not others? It's really easy to hate on Grand Theft Auto because the name alone indicates the game isn't going to be about herding magical unicorns into a fantasy pen where you can brush them and feed them lovingly at the end. Why did the hot coffee mod get so much attention despite the fact that it's only accessible on the PC version after the user manually looks for and downloads a mod on an unpatched version of the disc that came out before the mod was discovered? Why does Mass Effect get the spotlight for a 10-second scene with less side boob than the beach on a winter's day, when games like Dante's Inferno can have full frontal nudity and no one says a word? 2 reasons. 1, because the media cherry-picks these games and holds them up as the worst of the worst, when anyone who has spent more than a year playing games knows that these aren't that bad at all. And 2, because parents usually don't understand the content. They don't have the time and may not have the chance to explore games like we do. If they did, they'd be playing the games before or with you. That's what my dad did. He let me play Doom when I was a kid because he'd already played it. He knew it was violent, but he also knew it was a lot of fun and that I'd really enjoy it. But not every parent can or should do that. It's just not realistic. Parents are busy and they shouldn't have to sacrifice their precious free time engaging in a pastime they aren't passionate about. Try giving your parents a controller and having them play a simple racing game. Most of them will probably end up stuck in a wall, going the wrong way, or finding the one spot on the map that causes their car to morph into a horribly distorted ball of parts begging to be put out of its misery. But as I said before, there's more at stake here than your parents letting you play a game. If we don't do anything, sooner or later, nervous parents and the media will. They'll eventually turn their gaze away from gun control and start looking for something easier to fix. When it comes to politics, it doesn't matter if doing an action will solve a problem. It just matters if you look like you're doing something. Even if the decision made is ultimately detrimental to everyone, it is more important that people believe that you're trying to make things better. So here's what will end up happening. Eventually something like Columbine or Sandy Hook is going to happen again. That unfortunate, misguided, mentally ill kid will have played some seriously violent game. I'm talking about Gears of War, The Punisher, Manhunt, or something else along those lines. And as a result, the media will get people to demand the government takes action. The good news is that the American government can't directly censor games. That isn't necessarily the same in other countries, but the First Amendment of the Constitution prevents the government from telling game developers what they can and can't put in a game. The bad news is that the government has an unlimited number of creatively evil ways of indirectly controlling what the game developers create, including any number of these, most of which have already been discussed in one form or another. These may seem impossible right now, but they're really not that far-fetched. The gaming industry is struggling enough as it is. Increased government regulation of any sort could very easily spell the end of gaming as we know it. My ultimate goal here isn't to prevent people from playing games or saying that you should be allowed to play some games and not others. It is simply to give you, and more importantly, your parents, the information to make the decision for yourselves. Your parents understand you as an individual much better than I do, so if they're convinced you'd be okay playing Prototype or Gears of War, I'm convinced. But right now, there really isn't anyone who can honestly say they are objectively on the side of both the parents and the gamers. Right now, we have game executives out to make a profit, game developers vying to keep their freedom of speech, media out to vilify anyone to keep their ratings high, politicians trying to be popular to keep their jobs, and parents scared of the suffering of their children because of the potential ramifications of violent media. My content walks an extremely thin line. On the one hand, I have to convince parents to not be afraid of video games, regardless of whether that game is violent or not. This is a monumental task, one that involves giving them the ability to see everything they can perceive as potentially harmful to your social and moral development. On the other hand, I have to convince the gamers that I am not here to take these games away from you. I have to convince you that I am your advocate and would be willing to go toe-to-toe with those who would strip away everything that makes video games the most entertaining, complex, detailed, free form of expression this world has ever seen. I have to convince you that I have the motivation to stand in front of a group of angry parents and explain to them that video games are not the sources of social decline that the media would like them to believe. That in fact, these games that we know and love are amazing stories filled with complex characters and situations that, more often than not, encourage the player to do the right thing in the face of insurmountable odds. That games encourage players to be heroes, paragons, and saviors much more often than pariahs and villains, and that even when these games paint the player as a renegade or an anti-hero, the stories still convince the player that there's some sort of ultimate good to their actions. I don't want gamers to bicker amongst each other about whether one game is appropriate for them or another is not. As I said before, the real purpose of these game reviews is to provide the information to the necessary people so that they can make the decisions for themselves. The reflexive reactions that gamers have to the perceived attack of their beloved franchise is completely understandable. Parental reviews have been designed to make parents afraid of games for far too long. It is more important that we inform everyone about the content within games so that they are unafraid of the potential social implications of the new Call of Duty, Mass Effect, or Grand Theft Auto, rather than letting them stew in a constant state of terror over whether their son or daughter will end up being the victim of another poor, misguided soul who inevitably uses games as a bullet shield for their own mental issues. I don't expect everyone to agree with my recommendations. They are, after all, simply recommendations. However, it is far more important to me that you and your parents understand all of the mature content within these games and can make the ultimate decision for yourselves. I don't want anyone, whether it's the media, the government, activist groups, executives, or myself, to make the decision for you. For more of my comments, head on over to SideStoryGames.com and click on the Carmine's Comments tab.